This table began with a feeling rather than a sketch. I wanted it to look like something that had quietly lived inside a warm little room for many years. A table with a story in its surface, with soft worn corners, faded paint, delicate flowers, and tiny details that make you stop and look closer. Not a perfect modern piece, but something gentle and comforting. The kind of miniature furniture that feels like it already belongs to a tiny home filled with morning light, books, flowers, and peaceful moments. And honestly, this project became one of those builds where every small detail slowly changed the atmosphere piece by piece. At first, it was only paper, flat sheets, printed textures, and a simple idea. But somewhere between cutting the first panels and assembling the legs, it started to feel real. That is one of my favorite things about miniatures. You begin with ordinary materials, and little by little they transform into something with personality. Before I even started building, I spent a long time thinking about the design for the tabletop. Because when you look at a dining table, your eyes naturally go to the top surface first. It becomes the center of attention. And since this table is meant to stand in the middle of a miniature room, I wanted the decoration to look beautiful from every side, not only from one direction. That is why the floral composition is arranged in a more balanced way. So the table can be viewed from any angle and still feel harmonious. If someone places the table differently inside their dollhouse, the flowers still flow naturally. Nothing looks upside down or awkward. I also decided not to overload the design with too many birds this time. The room already has many decorative details, so I wanted the tabletop to feel elegant and calm instead of visually heavy. The background color was another important decision. At first, the yellow tone was brighter and cleaner, but something about it felt too new, too fresh. And this collection needed warmth and age. So I softened the color and added an aged crackled texture with subtle wear marks, almost like old painted wood that has been loved for years. Not damaged, just gently aged. And then came the soft lavender border around the edges. That border completely changed the mood of the table. Suddenly the whole piece started connecting beautifully with the bench and the kitchen cabinet from the same collection. It gave everything a quiet vintage character without making the design feel too dark. I think one of the most enjoyable parts of miniature furniture is this balance between realism and imagination. In real life, furniture has weight, texture, imperfections, layers of paint, tiny scratches, faded corners. And when you try to recreate that feeling in miniature scale, you start paying attention to details you would normally never notice. Even something simple like the edge of a tabletop suddenly becomes important. Should it look perfectly straight? Slightly worn? Softened by time? Should the paint feel thick and layered, or smooth and polished? Those tiny decisions slowly shape the personality of the piece. And because this is a detailed project, I approached the assembly slowly. This is definitely not the kind of build you rush through in one evening. Some projects are quick and playful, but this one is more about enjoying the process little by little. Cutting the panels carefully, preparing the edges, organizing the parts, testing the fit before gluing. Everything becomes part of the experience. Of course, everyone develops their own way of building miniatures over time, and that is part of the fun too. Some people prepare all the pieces first, others assemble section by section. Some like quiet, slow evenings with tea and music while cutting paper, and others enjoy spending an entire weekend building without stopping. There is no wrong way to enjoy a creative project. One of the things I especially love about miniature tables is imagining the scenes that could exist around them. A tiny breakfast with ceramic cups, fresh flowers in a vase, a miniature cookbook left open in the middle, maybe a pie cooling near the window, maybe someone sewing at the table in the afternoon, while sunlight moves slowly across the floor. Furniture becomes much more interesting when it feels connected to a story. And I think that is why vintage styles remain so comforting. They are imperfect in the best possible way. Modern furniture often tries to look flawless, but vintage furniture carries traces of time. Slightly faded paint, worn edges, uneven texture, layers built over years. Those imperfections create warmth. When I started designing miniature furniture, I noticed that many tiny pieces looked too clean or too digital. Everything was sharp and perfect. But real homes rarely feel like that. Real homes feel layered, soft, lived in. So now I always try to include tiny visual details that make the furniture feel more natural and emotional. Even the floral artwork on this table was designed with that feeling in mind. I did not want bright modern flowers with harsh contrast. Instead, the colors are softer and slightly muted, almost like vintage botanical illustrations printed on aged paper. The flowers blend gently into the background instead of shouting for attention. And surprisingly, choosing the right flowers took a long time. Some arrangements looked too formal. Others felt too busy. I tested different compositions until the movement finally felt balanced. The larger blooms create a calm focal point, while the smaller branches and butterflies add motion around the edges. I also wanted the table to work beautifully with the matching bench and cabinet from the same collection. That is something I always think about while designing furniture series. Every item should have its own personality, but they also need to feel connected together inside one room. The lavender details help unify the collection, while the warm yellow and aged textures keep everything soft and cozy. And because the room already includes floral elements on several pieces, I tried to vary the composition slightly so every object feels unique. The table legs were another interesting part of the design process. Instead of making simple narrow legs, I decided to create wider panel-style supports. They almost resemble decorative cabinet doors, which ties the table visually back to the kitchen furniture. That small design choice made the entire set feel more intentional and cohesive. Sometimes people think miniature furniture design is only about shrinking real furniture into a smaller scale, but honestly, it is much more than that. Scale changes everything. A detail that looks beautiful in full size may suddenly feel overwhelming in miniature. A texture that seems subtle in real life can become too strong once reduced. So designing miniatures becomes a constant balance between realism and simplification. For example, weathering and aged effects must stay delicate. Too much texture, and the piece starts looking messy instead of realistic. Too little texture, and it loses warmth. The goal is finding that quiet middle point where the miniature still feels believable. I think that is why I enjoy working slowly on these projects. The slower pace gives me time to notice small things. Maybe the edge color needs to be softer. Maybe the flowers should sit slightly higher. Maybe the crackled texture should fade more near the center. Those tiny changes are almost invisible individually, but together they completely affect the mood. And honestly, there is something deeply relaxing about repetitive creative work like this. Cutting, folding, gluing, assembling tiny pieces. After a while it becomes peaceful, almost meditative. Sometimes I work late into the evening with soft music playing in the background, and suddenly hours pass without noticing. Miniatures have a strange ability to slow everything down. I also love how these projects encourage patience. In everyday life we are constantly rushing from one thing to another, but detailed miniature builds ask you to pause. You cannot force delicate assembly. You cannot rush drying glue or precise folds. The project unfolds at its own pace. And maybe that is part of why people enjoy dollhouses and miniatures so much. They create tiny worlds where everything feels calmer, quieter, and more intentional. This table especially feels connected to that idea for me. It is not grand or luxurious. It is simply warm and inviting. A comfortable little table for a miniature home filled with flowers, sunlight, and handmade details. I can already imagine it standing beside the matching bench, with tiny dishes arranged on top, and perhaps a small vase in the center. And because the tabletop design is balanced from every side, the table works beautifully whether it stands against a wall or in the middle of a room. Another thing I really enjoy is seeing how printed textures change once assembled into three-dimensional furniture. On a flat sheet, the artwork is already pretty, but once the pieces fold into shape, shadows appear, corners gain depth, and suddenly the furniture feels much more alive. Even the tiniest shelf or drawer creates realism once light starts interacting with the structure. And that is one reason I always encourage people to take their time during assembly. Careful folds and neat edges make a huge difference in the final appearance. These projects reward patience. At the same time, I never want the process to feel stressful. Miniature crafting should feel enjoyable, not intimidating. So even though this table includes many detailed elements, I designed it in a way that allows the project to unfold gradually, one step at a time. There is also something special about creating miniature furniture from paper specifically. Paper feels humble and simple, but it can transform into surprisingly elegant pieces with enough layering and structure. People are often amazed that something so lightweight can end up looking almost like painted wood. And I think paper miniatures have a certain charm that other materials do not. They feel handmade in a very comforting way. Tiny imperfections become part of the personality. A slightly softened corner, a gentle curve in the paper, a subtle shadow under a shelf. All those things make the piece feel more human and artistic. I also wanted this table to feel versatile enough for different miniature interiors. Even though it has a floral vintage style, the colors are muted enough to blend into many room designs. It could fit inside a romantic cottage kitchen, a shabby chic dining room, a cozy farmhouse setting, or even a quiet artist studio. And because the table itself is fairly simple structurally, the decorative surface becomes the emotional focus. That balance helps the furniture feel elegant instead of overcrowded. One thing I have learned while designing collections is that people connect emotionally to atmosphere more than perfection. They remember how a piece feels. Does it feel cozy? Does it feel nostalgic? Does it feel calming? That emotional atmosphere matters much more than technical perfection alone. So when I create projects like this, I always try to imagine the mood first. The colors, textures, flowers, and decorative details all grow naturally from that feeling. And for this table, the feeling was warmth, a little vintage charm, quiet afternoons, lavender tones, faded paint, soft sunlight, a peaceful miniature room that feels comforting to look at. I hope that feeling comes through in the final piece. And if you decide to build this project yourself, I truly recommend approaching it slowly. Put on your favorite music or a movie in the background, prepare your tools, organize your pieces, and enjoy the process step by step. This is the kind of miniature project that becomes part of the atmosphere around you while you work on it. Little by little, flat paper transforms into furniture. And before you realize it, there is a tiny vintage table standing in front of you, covered with soft flowers and warm colors, ready to become part of an entirely new miniature world. Thank you for spending this creative time with YouPaper. I always love sharing these tiny projects and peaceful miniature moments with you, and I hope this table brings warmth and inspiration to your own miniature collection.